Ever imagine designing a blueprint for an entire nation?
I can't even imagine designing a doghouse.
Well, that's what the framers of the U.S. Constitution had to do over 200 years ago.
Wow.
We're diving into a specific part of their masterpiece today, Article 1, which focuses on the legislative branch, your Congress, your House, and your Senate. And get this, it's the oldest written national constitution still in use today.
Serious?
Pretty amazing, right?
Yeah, that's incredible. It really shows how forward-thinking they were. It's remarkable how they created a document that's lasted so long and still guides the most powerful nation in the world.
Okay, so Article 1. Basically, it sets the ground rules for how Congress operates. They decided to divide the power between two chambers, the House of Representatives and the Senate,
Right.
each with its own distinct flavor. What were they aiming for structurally?
You can think of it as a balancing act between staying connected to the people and taking a longer, more strategic perspective.
I see.
The House, with its 2-year terms, is designed to be directly accountable to the people, reflecting their immediate concerns and needs.
Like a pulse check on the nation's mood.
Exactly.
Every 2 years, boom, back to the voters.
Yes.
Now, I noticed something in the Wikipedia article you shared. The number of representatives is capped at 435.
Yes.
That hasn't always been the case, has it?
No, it hasn't. Initially, the House was intended to expand proportionally with the population, but logistically, a 1,000-member legislative body. By the early 20th century, it was clear that they needed to make a change, so they settled on 435 to maintain some order.
Makes sense. But it also raises the question, is a fixed number still truly representative in the 21st century, given the significant growth of the U.S. population? What do you think?
That's a question that surfaces frequently. It underscores the inherent tension between representation and practicality in a system as large and complex as the U.S. government.
Okay, so we've got the House, the people's pulse. Now let's move on to the Senate. 6-year terms for senators, a bit more breathing room, it seems. What's the logic behind that longer leash, so to speak?
The Senate was designed to be the cooler head, the steady hand on the wheel of governance. The longer terms allow senators to consider the long-term implications of their decisions, potentially taking a more measured approach that isn't solely driven by immediate public opinion.
So, while the House is busy reacting to the latest headlines, the Senate can step back, focus on the bigger picture.
I like that. And of course, there are also stricter eligibility criteria for senators.
Right.
You got to be older, a citizen for longer.
Exactly. They envision senators having more life experience, a deeper well of knowledge to draw upon when making decisions with far-reaching consequences.
It's fascinating how they incorporated those different paces, those diverse perspectives, directly into the structure of the legislative branch.
Yes.
It's as if they anticipated the need for both rapid responses and careful deliberation in the lawmaking process.
And that deliberate design is key to understanding how Article I plays out in practice.
Okay, so we've got these two chambers,
Right.
each carefully calibrated for its role in Congress.
Yeah.
But Article 1, it's not just about structure, is it? No, it's not.
It's about power.
Absolutely.
The power to make the laws that shape the nation.
Mm-hmm.
What were they thinking when they handed Congress this immense responsibility?
They understood that the power to make laws
Yeah.
is the essence of governing,
Right.
but they were also wary
Okay.
of giving too much power to one branch.
I see.
Which is why Article I is
Yeah.
about defining the powers of Congress, but also limiting them.
It's like they're walking this tightrope between giving Congress the tools to govern, but also making sure those tools can't be misused.
Exactly.
And that's where we get into those specific powers laid out in Article 1, Section 8.
Right.
I'm looking at your notes here, and you flagged some really interesting ones.
Yeah.
What caught your eye?
Well, one that often gets overlooked
Okay.
is Clause 8. The patent and copyright clause.
Right.
It might seem kind of niche,
Right.
but it underpins so much of what we take for granted today.
Okay. Refresh my memory on that one.
It's the clause that gives Congress the power to promote innovation
Okay.
by securing for a limited time the exclusive rights to authors and inventors over their work.
Right.
It's essentially the foundation for intellectual property law in the U.S.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So the music I listen to,
Yeah.
the books I read, the software we use to record this podcast,
All of it.
all indirectly influenced by this clause.
Precisely. The Founding Fathers recognized that protecting creative labor
Yeah.
was essential for progress.
Yeah.
It's amazing to think that this framework from centuries ago
Okay.
is still relevant to today with digital innovation.
Talk about being ahead of their time.
I know.
Okay, another one that stood out to me.
Yeah.
Clause 11, the power to declare war.
Right.
That's a heavy one.
Big one.
What was the thinking there, giving that power solely to Congress?
Well, it goes back to that aversion to concentrated power,
Okay.
especially when it comes to something like war.
Right.
They wanted a system where the decision to go to war
Yeah.
had to be debated and approved by the people's representatives.
And yet in today's world, with things like cyber warfare,
Right.
terrorism, threats that don't really fit into 18th century conceptions,
Yeah.
has this clause become a bit outdated?
It's a question at the heart of many current debates
Yeah.
about the balance of power in the U.S.
Right.
When is it appropriate for a president to use military force without a formal declaration of war?
Right.
There's no easy answer.
No easy answers.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that the Constitution isn't set in stone.
Right.
It's a living thing
Yes.
that we're constantly reinterpreting.
And that's why an informed citizenry is so important.
Yeah.
Understanding these clauses,
Yeah.
debating how to apply them. It's how we make sure the Constitution remains a relevant and vital document.
Now, you said that Article I
Yeah.
is also about limiting Congress's power.
Yes.
Where do we see that?
You see it throughout.
Okay.
But the most explicit example is
Yeah.
this system of checks and balances.
Right, that whole tug-of-war between the branches of government.
Exactly.
How does that work to keep Congress in check?
Well, for one thing,
Yeah.
any law passed by Congress has to be signed by the president.
Right,
That alone is a significant check.
right,
Then you've got the veto power
right.
that sends it back to Congress
Okay.
for them to reconsider.
So they're not calling all the shots,
No,
even when it comes to lawmaking.
not at all. And then you've got the judiciary,
Right.
the Supreme Court, which can strike down laws passed by Congress
Okay.
if they're deemed unconstitutional.
So between the president and the court,
Yeah,
there are some pretty serious checks on Congress's power.
for sure.
Yeah.
But then they also built in some internal checks and balances.
Right, within Congress itself.
Exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
How?
The two-chamber system itself,
Right.
the House and the Senate, is a form of checks and balances.
Okay.
Both have to agree.
Before sending it to the president.
It's like the intentionally built-in gridlock.
In a way, yes. It forces compromise, forces deliberation,
Yeah.
consensus building.
Okay.
Neither chamber can just railroad through legislation.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But before we move on, there's one more clause I wanted to get to.
Okay.
Clause 18 of Section 8,
Right.
the necessary and proper clause.
Ah, yes.
It says that Congress has the power to make any laws
Yeah.
necessary and proper
Mm-hmm.
for carrying out its other powers,
That's right.
even if those specific laws aren't written in the Constitution,
It's sometimes called the elastic clause.
because it can be stretched.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's been used to justify a lot of congressional actions,
Right.
which of course leads to debate
Oh,
about how far is too far.
Can you give an example of how that's played out?
Sure.
Yeah.
Take, for example, the National Bank.
Okay.
The Constitution doesn't say Congress can make a bank,
Go ahead.
but Alexander Hamilton
Right.
argued that it was necessary and proper in
Yeah.
order for Congress to do things like collect taxes,
Yeah.
regulate commerce.
I see.
They needed a bank.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So this simple clause
Yeah,
has been at the center of some pretty big showdowns
that's right.
over federal power.
Exactly.
It seems like the framers left some things open to interpretation.
They were walking a fine line.
Yeah.
They had to create a framework that was both enduring
Right.
but also adaptable.
Yeah.
And the necessary and proper clause is a testament to that.
It makes you think about the Constitution almost like a puzzle box
I like that.
with these hidden compartments
Yeah.
that we're still discovering all these years later.
It emphasizes why engaging with these documents,
Yeah.
grappling with the complexity,
Right.
is an ongoing process.
Because we've talked about the structure of Congress,
Yeah.
its powers,
Yeah.
the limits on those powers.
Right.
Some of the debates that still continue today
Exactly.
stemming from Article I.
Yeah.
What's the big takeaway?
Mm.
The big aha moment you want listeners to have?
I think the biggest takeaway is that Article I isn't just some dusty old document.
Right.
It's a living, breathing framework
Yeah.
that still shapes how we live and govern ourselves.
It's the original code, still running centuries later.
Exactly.
But code can be buggy.
True.
We've talked about how the Constitution couldn't have predicted everything.
Right, like modern warfare,
Right.
the internet,
Yeah.
the sheer size of the government today.
So how do we reconcile those gaps between then and now?
That's where the framers were brilliant.
Yeah.
They didn't try to create rules for every situation.
Right.
Instead, they gave us a framework built on core principles:
Okay.
separation of powers,
Right.
checks and balances,
Good.
representative government.
It's up to us to keep interpreting those principles. It's
Exactly.
like they gave us the building blocks
Yeah.
and said, okay, you figure out how to build the future.
That's a great way to put it.
But that's a lot of responsibility for us.
It is. We can't expect the Constitution to solve every problem. We
Yeah.
have to understand it,
Right.
engage with it,
Yeah.
argue about it even.
Because it's only as strong as our commitment to it.
It-
You said informed citizenry a few times now.
Yeah.
I think that's really important. It's not enough to just vote.
No, it's not.
We need to participate,
Yes.
hold our leaders accountable,
Right.
make sure they're actually following the Constitution.
And that's what makes conversations like this so important.
Yeah.
Understanding Article 9,
Right.
the powers it grants,
Right.
how those powers are balanced.
Yeah.
It helps us become more informed, engaged citizens.
Okay, so we've covered a lot.
We have.
The structure of Congress,
Right.
its powers,
Yes.
the limits on those powers,
Mm-hmm.
and even some of the debates that are still going on today.
Exactly.
But before we wrap up, what's your biggest takeaway from Article 9?
You know, for me, it's that tension
Okay.
between having a government that can address the nation's problems.
But also making sure that we're protecting against tyranny.
Right.
Article I reflects that struggle.
It does.
It reminds us that freedom requires constant vigilance.
That's a great point to end on.
It is.
To our listeners out there, you heard it here.
You did.
Dive into the Constitution.
Read it.
Study it.
Debate it.
Wrestle with it.
Yes.
Because an informed and engaged citizenry is what keeps this whole thing going.
I couldn't agree more.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive
Sounds good.
into Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. We hope you enjoyed it.
I did.
Until next time, stay curious and keep on diving deep.